Welcome back to College Conversations. I'm Dr. Fedor, and I help you navigate college. Please remember to hit subscribe, like, and share this video. I have many students email me and asking me about planning for their future and goal setting, and specifically power planning, as in, should they have a 1, 3, and 5-year plan? What happens if they don't have a plan? So today I have with me Ryan Stelzer, co-founder at Strategy of Mind and co-author of Think, Talk, Create, which I just saw at Barnes & Noble, by the way. So congratulations again. Here to help me unpack some of the upsides and downsides of planning.
Hi, Janice. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So just on a personal note, to start this off, Ryan, how much planning did you do when you were a college student, and do you regret that?
Well, there's a lot of decisions I made as a college student that I regret, and those typically involve very little planning. But the ones that as far as planning goes, I always think of planning as trying to achieve some desired outcome. So there's some end game that I'm trying to attain. It's almost like a desired state. It's like I wish the way things were in the future. I have to get there somehow, and that's what planning entails: is how do I get to that end of the maze? And so what I would do is I'd often think about things backwards. So whenever I take my nieces to a restaurant, for example, and we play those little games on the crayons on the sketching, whenever we play the mazes, I sometimes show them how to work backwards, how to start at the end of the maze, and so that'll bring you back to the beginning. And that can be a helpful way to frame that sort of puzzle solving. But I think for planning, it's a similar exercise where you think about, okay, what do I want to achieve? What do I want to attain? And then let me work backwards. Okay, so what are the steps I have to take to get there?
That's good advice. And also visualizing, where do you want to be? Visualizing and deciding on your goal and then working backwards is a good way to set this plan in motion. Why is planning especially useful for students?
It's especially useful, I think, because it's a tremendous skill to cultivate, and it can always be nurtured and developed. So planning as a student, generally, there's some very serious outcomes, and there's some very serious events that you need to plan for when you're in college.
Right.
But sometimes planning, the gravity of planning increases as you enter the workforce and as you move up in your career. So if, for example, if you're a business student planning their classes, that's great, and there's a lot of impact there. But if you're a CEO planning the strategic direction of a company over the next 5 years, when you're in your 50s or your 60s, well, that has some significant impact. It's almost like you're building a skill set and refining that skill set early on, that way you can deploy it later. So being a good planner is effective. Some students get very down on themselves, I think, about how, well, I'm not a good planner. I don't plan. I'm more of a procrastinator.
Yeah.
Well, procrastination and planning aren't the same things. You can still have a plan and procrastinate on a plan. Setting a plan is just important because I think it's something that you're going to use always. It's a perennial skill. It's evergreen.
So even if you are not a good planner now as a student, planning is a skill that you can develop. First of all, you can get better at planning. Second of all, it is a skill that you're going to need for the rest of your life. And getting started now, being a good planner and sort of developing that skill will serve them as well into their future.
Exactly.
How often should students reevaluate their plan?
Well, it depends on the timeline of the plan. So there's short-term goals in planning, there's medium-term, and then there's long-term. And the way I think about short-term goals is really anything within 6 months. I mean, short term is relative, the immediate future. It can be tomorrow, maybe a couple of weeks from now, but within 6 months. And then the medium term, I think about, well, what do I want to be doing next year, or where do I want to be as a student at the end of when I graduate? So I think of medium term as something maybe a couple, year or two, maybe out. And then long-term planning is really anything, I think, beyond 2 years, because when you look out on that time horizon, there's so many unknowns that it's difficult to formulate a concrete plan. You can have some idea, but I guarantee you that whatever long-term plan you have, there will be adjustments that need to be made. I guarantee it. There's going to be pivots. You're going to have to make tweaks to the plan because things are going to happen that are unforeseen. So, I think as you move along and as you progress in your planning, it's just important to think about the different time horizons that you have, and then reevaluating when necessary based on deadlines or sort of endpoints. So what are the natural moments of reflection? So if I have a plan to get an A on a paper that's due next week, well, I have a pretty short time horizon to reflect on that. If it's a long-term plan, then maybe I can just check in whenever there are intervals that would remind me or be relevant to that plan. So for example, if I want to graduate with honors, that means I have to have a certain GPA
Right.
after each semester. So
Right.
maybe after each semester, I just check in and see how I'm doing on that plan. So I just set my parameters for planning
Right.
around the time course.
In the world of academia, there's a lot of natural points that invite reevaluation, like the end of the semester when grades come out. How are you doing? Should you stay with this major? Do you need to study more next semester? And then the next semester, at the end of that semester, and then at the end of the academic year. So there's a lot of natural built-in set points. I think, especially with this time of year, with all the graduations, this is the time where people stop and say, okay, that's great. Congratulations. Look what you've accomplished. And then the next question is, what are you going to do now? And that's what is your plan? So everybody's going around saying, what is your plan? What is your plan? And if you don't have a plan, people are like, what's the matter with you? You've been in college for 4 years or high school for 4 years or whatever. What is your plan? So there's a lot of conversation around that. My last question is there any downside to all this planning?
Well, it could be very overwhelming. And I think the biggest downside, to be honest, that I've seen and maybe even experienced at times is getting down on yourself. I mean, there's a tremendous potential to be very self-critical. And I think it's important to remember that plans are guesstimates. They're not set in stone.
Right.
And the fact that you're setting a plan, you should be incredibly proud of the fact that you have a goal and you're trying to achieve some goal. And then, okay, well, let's figure out how we get there. And maybe you don't actually reach the finish line you're hoping to finish. You're hoping to get across, but you get close,
Right.
or you go in a different race altogether, and all of a sudden you explore this new path. That's okay too. So I think it's being kind to yourself throughout the entire process. But all in all, and it's okay to have multiple plans going. So the classic example and that I can think of is in my own experiences, people ask, okay, how did you get a job at the White House? And I think going back to that analogy of working backwards from a maze, well, if I had this endpoint in mind, I had this outcome that I wanted.
Right.
I worked backwards and I thought, well, the White House is very structured points of entry. There's certain careers, there's certain paths. What are the paths that I can take? And you can take multiple paths, so you can have multiple plans going at the same time. If your goal is, okay, how do I get a good job after graduation? Well, you can have multiple plans working at the same time simultaneously. I like to think of it as a dart strategy where you throw a bunch of darts at the board and you see whichever one is closest to the bullseye.
Right.
But all of those darts are plans, and and it's okay to have multiple plans working for you at the same time. Just don't get down on yourself throughout the entire process.
Good advice. Don't get down on yourself with planning. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today. Please remember to hit subscribe, like, and share this video, and remember to keep learning.